Welcome to our webinar, Unlocking End-of-Year Growth, Actionable Steps to Convert More Leads into Sales. I'm Stephen Wagner, Vice President at KWSM, a digital marketing agency. I'm excited to introduce our speakers for this webinar. First, our moderator, Dave Oates. Dave is a 30-year PR practitioner who's dealt with a wide array of adverse public events. His crisis communications experiences include handling contentious matters involving highly visible, multi-generational, family-owned enterprises, as well as employee and executive misconduct, cybersecurity attacks, product recalls, mass layoffs, large-scale accidents, criminal investigations, and civil litigation matters. So thank you, Dave, for being here and for being our moderator.
Appreciate it.
Our panelists will be Katie Wagner and Brent Bonine. Katie Wagner is the president of KWSM, a digital marketing agency. KWSM specializes in lead generation and offers a full range of services, including website design, SEO, content creation, and digital advertising. Prior to opening the agency in 2010, Katie spent more than a decade as a TV and radio journalist. And Brent Bonine is the managing director of AcSELLerate. He is a seasoned sales professional with extensive experience spanning various industries. Since 2012, Brent has focused on collaborating with small to medium-sized businesses to enhance their sales organizations. A firm believer in structured growth strategies, Brent emphasizes the importance of a robust sales process model and continuous measurement of sales activities and effectiveness. So I'm now going to turn it over to Dave Oates to begin the discussion. Dave?
Thanks, Stephen. I appreciate it. And thanks to Katie and Brent for joining us. Look, let's get into this because we got a lot we want to get to in the next 45 minutes or so. And thank you all for joining us. See some familiar faces in the participants. And we look forward to your participation in the dialogue during the next hour. But for Katie, to start with you and then to Brent, let's say 2024 was, weird. I mean, we take away the election and the global conflicts notwithstanding, we had ups and downs in inflation. We've got the Fed's intervention. We've got still supply chain ironing out from post-COVID. Consumer trends are still shifting. What are you telling your clients and business leaders on taking advantage of the next 6 weeks of this year, but then also stepping up for 2025?
Yes, it was a wonky year, to say the least. We've got a lot of geopolitical things going on. And I think, Dave, what we saw throughout this year was really a lot of hesitation. There was sort of this undercurrent of fear and uncertainty, and people were afraid to sort of move things forward. And we saw that at the agency. I saw that in a lot of my clients' companies. Everybody I talk to out networking is feeling the same thing. And I think we're all hoping that now that the election is behind us, and now that we sort of know what the future looks like a little bit, it at least is going to open things up, and consumers are coming back to the market. They're going to be less afraid to spend, less afraid to move forward with initiatives. So I would tell people that right now is the time to get a solid sales and marketing and lead gen funnel in place so that you're ready to hit it hard in 2025. Because as we get closer to the new year, I think people are starting to look ahead and say, how is the election going to affect my business in the new year, and what plans do I need to put in place? So if you want to be ready to sell to those people and take advantage of those opportunities, now is the time to be looking at your lead gen strategy, to be putting new initiatives in place, to be talking to your sales team, to make sure you can capitalize on that when things open up.
Brent, how about you?
Yeah, I think on that point, I think the election, whether that was the cause, I do think it highlights the fact that where our culture is trending. And where we're trending is to this idea that a lot of the institutions we used to value and stuff are no longer trustworthy. We don't trust our politicians. We don't trust the media. We don't trust institutions because there's so much that's being brought forward. You really don't know who to trust. You can find somebody with your perspective or not your perspective. It's just a matter of looking, right? So that really shapes sales conversations. And I think it's really about, as we approach the end of the year, encouraging salespeople to not only stay engaged, but how they engage with customers has to be focused on building that trust, to really demonstrate that you care, that you're bringing a solution that adds value, that you're solving a problem, that becomes kind of the focus of how you communicate you're trustworthy in a culture that really is making it hard for people to trust anything, right? So I think it's more of about finishing strong, but having the right conversations to nudge people forward is really getting back to why you do what you do.
Brent, you spurred something for me because I also think it's a really good time to sort of dial in your core offerings and think about which products and services bring the biggest value to your customers and really lean into those. Because as people start to move forward, they're going to want things that give you the biggest bang for your buck, that provide the most value, that solve the most problems. And it's maybe not time to start talking about your whole suite of auxiliary items. Really focus on those core products and services that are going to make the biggest difference for your target audience.
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote I heard that I love. It says, people don't care about what you do until you know what you can do for them. And so really focusing on the what you do for them before you start telling about what your product does, I think is an important way to distinguish yourself from the competition.
No, I really appreciated both of your inputs on that one, because as I see it, and Brent, I do agree with you. I think that there's an issue of just who do you trust, who can you count on, who can you rely on. So what you say and do in all formats, right? Whether it's digital, it's offline, it's in conversation, one-on-one with customers or business partners, matters. And it has to be one in which you take your reputation seriously and manage that on a daily basis. Don't take that for granted, because in this day when trust is fragile in many cases because of the world in which we live, I agree with you. I think it has to be a situation where you are constantly staying vigilant as to who's saying what about you and what you're saying and when to focus. Well, I'm going to put a pin on the messaging elements of that for a minute, because I wanted to ask you, and Brent, I'm going to start with you. How do you then, with that sort of environment that we're in, the opportunity to set goals for next year, taking this opportunity now that things at least are in a situation where we can at least forecast a little bit more or predict a little bit more of how things are going to go? What kind of goals and objectives are you advising that your clients are setting, that organizations set in sales and in marketing for the next 6 weeks and next year?
Yeah, so interesting, right? Because generally speaking, businesses set sales targets for the year. And if you're on a calendar year, you're on that final push to hit the targets that were set for you at the end of the year. For some, it may be, what do I have to do just to catch up and hit my goal? For others who may be fortunate, it could be, what's the gravy I'm adding on top to an already good year? But at the end of the day, that sales target has kind of been set. So you would think the strong finish is really the goal. And I think as sales leaders, you've got to keep your reps focused on the fact that even though, let's just face it, during the holidays, people downshift. Even if they don't necessarily completely unplug, there's just a lighter touch. There's a little less engagement. There's a little more openness to it. Just seems that things tend to move slower at the buyer level. That doesn't give salespeople the opportunity to take their foot off the gas, right? So the one hand is you've got to go for the strong finish. But I think the way you do it isn't a pressure. It's really getting back to reminding that client what the value of your solution brings and how soon they can recognize the benefits of that value. Get it back to that. Here's the problem you have. Here's how we're going to solve it. Let's get that going so that we can get 2025 off to a strong year. So I think it's really the how you get back to thing. But again, you gotta stay the course, right?
Katie, how about you?
Well, I think from a marketing standpoint, the answer really lies in what type of product or service you're selling, what type of business you have. Because if you have an e-commerce business or you're marketing direct to consumer, the holidays can actually be a really busy time, right? We have Black Friday and holiday sales.
Sure.
And so certainly you would have wanted to strategize what your promotions and pushes are going to be through this time before now. If you haven't, that might be homework this week. And I would see that through. But then I would also be sort of taking a backward look at what were our trends over this year. right? What did we see? For many people that I talked to, the first of the year started stronger and then it got weaker in the middle, and maybe they were flatter at the end of the year than they wanted to be. So look back and say, what can we learn from that? What was working? What isn't working? Where have we seen the biggest return on our investment? And then I'm a big fan of incremental change. So if you did end flatter than you wanted to, what's one area that we think we could shore up or make a difference to move forward? You should not probably rewrite your whole marketing plan or throw everything out and start over, because it was a strange year. There were a lot of things that were in play this year that aren't necessarily going to be as relevant next year. And so I don't want you to start over, but I do want you to look at where are the opportunities where we really have a chance to make a difference and a chance to make that incremental improvement, and start putting strategies in place starting now to hit the ground running in January.
Yeah, no, I think for sales leaders, that's an interesting time, right? Because on the one hand, they have their foot on the gas to try to finish strong, but it's also the best time to be looking at what did or did not work and what changes am I going to make. And hopefully they've got good data and good processes in place where they can point to specific things that they want to correct in the future, right? In other words, just don't throw another number up and hope for a better year, but really, what am I going to be doing differently, and what levers do I need to pull to have a better year in 2025?
And depending on the structure of your team, it sometimes makes sense to bring in an outside advisor to help you audit it. Sometimes I find that we're a little too close to our sales and marketing activities and a little too in love with whatever we came up with. And so it can be helpful to just bring in a fractional resource to help you analyze what happened, audit what happened, and then make the plan moving forward, even if you're going to execute those things yourself.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But by the same token, I've heard from both of you something, at least this is what resonates with me, is the idea of don't panic. And I've seen, actually, I literally just had a call with a person with a company that I've been familiar with for several years that literally threw out the baby with the bathwater, to borrow that vernacular. Here we are 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, and they literally cut their marketing and lead gen team by a third. And it probably wasn't where, if they were going to cut, where I would have cut. Like just seeing the processes and the benefits where they were, it was almost panic driven. And there may have been some underlying themes, I don't know. But I'm scratching my head as I looked at that going, that's not where I would have made changes. So what I'm hearing from you all is certainly go with an educated decision when you're making changes, where you understand what's truly working, what's not. And don't necessarily create a complete overhaul at this stage of the game until you understand exactly what's going on, and be able then to sort of incrementally make those adjustments so you don't accidentally cut off something that's working.
Yeah, because I think sometimes we can't entirely tell what's working, right? Sometimes customers have had several touch points with us, and it's not necessarily the most recent one that did the job. And so if you cut off any tactic along the way, you can hurt the final outcome without meaning to. But also, I think it's important to remember that all lead gen strategies take a while to work. These are long-term strategies. You can't start doing something and get results the next day, typically. And so if you do a wholesale change, you're basically taking yourself back to start at square one again. And now you've got weeks and months to build that back up before you even know if the change is working. Whereas if you're more conservative and change a little at a time, you can see yourself building on the traction you've already got and trending in the right direction or the wrong direction and keep adjusting, rather than having to wait that initial period to even know.
Let's follow that train of thought then, if we could. I'm going to go a little out of sequence from what we had discussed about, and I'd like to talk about the metrics, if that's okay. For both of you, big on data, big on educated analysis. What are some of the critical sales and marketing metrics that businesses should be tracking right now? And how does that inform decisions when they're putting together 2025 strategies? Katie, can you take that first and then followed by Brent?
Yeah. So I own a digital agency. So I'm going to start with web traffic, right? You can tell a lot by analyzing the behavior on your website. Not only where does the traffic come from? Is it direct, meaning they typed in your website? Is it coming from search or from ads that you're running? But also, how long are they staying on your site? What pages are they looking at? What's the path through the site? If you have a high bounce rate, meaning people leaving the site, what pages
Right.
are they bouncing on? What point did they get stuck? And then conversion rate. Out of all that traffic that lands on the website, how many of them are taking the desired next step, whether that's calling you or filling out a content form? And I think that can tell you a lot if you analyze sort of that final hub touch point in your marketing strategy. And then you'll look at each tactic separately, like what is your engagement like on social media? What is your
Yeah.
open rate on email? How are they clicking? But to me, the website is the most important sort of flag of what's happening there. And then I also think it's important to know what your acquisition cost overall for a customer is. So, what are you spending on marketing to get a customer? And the only way to know if you're spending too little, too much, the right amount is to know what the lifetime value of a customer is. And it's always surprising to me when we start working with a new company and they come in for their digital marketing strategy and they can't tell us what the lifetime value of a customer is or how much a customer is worth to them over this extent of the engagement. And I think that is a crucial number that a lot of business owners overlook because we're looking at, our monthly revenues and our profitability, and that's all good. But you have to know if a client comes in the door today, how long are they going to stay and how much are they going to spend with you over the average lifetime of a client? If you know that, it's a lot easier to predict the success of your lead generation and how much activity you need in the top of the funnel. Because some of my clients, to be successful, need 10 leads a month and that's it.
Right.
Some of them need 40,
Right.
and those are very different strategies and very different ROI markers, but you have to know for your business what it is. And then I'm just going to throw one more thing in here. Sorry, Brent. But I think that often we think about, oh, what's it going to take to acquire new customers? And we've got to go after all these new customers. This might be a time when you want to take a step back and look at your existing customers and say, what are they doing with us? And what products or services do we offer that they're not yet utilizing? Because I think one of the most important metrics is what's your saturation level with those customers? Are there different things you could sell into the same people that already know, like, and trust you? Because to Brent's point, it's going to be a lot harder in this environment to build trust with new customers. So can you leverage the pool of people that already buy from you, already do business with you? And I would be tracking how much of your services are they using and how much more could you sell in there and put initiatives in place for that.
Brilliant. Brent, what do you got to add?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a big question because I think as you look at a revenue funnel, right? So certainly everything that Katie talked about with the marketing and the metrics, it gets to the point where that's the marketing is at the top end of the funnel. And then there's a point where salespeople start engaging with their prospect, right? When the salesperson now takes on the role of pushing that lead or that prospect towards the finish line. And oftentimes what I see is a lot of business owners set revenue goals, and then their metric is their monthly, are they on track to hit those on a monthly basis? And the problem with that is that it's all reactionary, right? You're waiting for the revenue to come in, you're waiting for the sales to be made. And unfortunately, it puts you in that situation where you start listening to the stories of what's going to happen next month and what's going to happen next month without really knowing, having any confidence in that. And so I would say that the metrics that sales leaders need to focus on and business owners go to from the point that sales rep engages with a prospect, what are the key activities that they have to do to engage with that prospect? And how effective are they at moving that prospect forward in each step? So, for example, if you have a more complex sale and you have to go through a discovery process to ascertain how many of the discovery meetings are happening and how many of those lead to a presentation or a proposal, and then of that proposal, how many of those deals are going into some kind of negotiation. But you look at both the activities and the effectiveness of those activities as they move through the funnel, so that you can actually see where the problems are occurring long before you have to wait for revenue to come in. Sales should be much more predictive about the momentum of your business versus waiting to earn that revenue before you make a business decision. So you really have to go further up. Where is the salesperson engaging? What are the different steps of that engagement, and how effective are they at moving prospects through that funnel? And one of the things I would say is, one of the measures of effectiveness is, if you're going to get to a no, get there fast. If you can qualify a buyer that they're not a good fit for your product or service, either you don't fit what they need or they don't really fit, the sooner you get to that, that's actually a win. Too many times salespeople will keep deals in the pipeline with the hope that something happens unexpectedly and it becomes a closed deal, and doesn't do anybody any good, right? The better thing is, get those qualified leads, find out what those metrics are, and reward the salespeople for moving deals through the pipeline, even if it means getting deals out early.
I love that, Brent, because it reminds me of people who say, oh, we've got so much web traffic. And it's like, okay, but how many conversions do you have, right? I'm a fan of the result. And it's like salespeople who say, I had so many meetings. Well, that may be good, but how many proposals do you have closed, right? How many conversations?
Right.
So
I will say this, those are all brilliant and well thought out. I will add one more to the mix, and this is coming from a crisis guy, a reputation guy. Know what your net promoter score is, and know how much you want to upgrade that, because I think it helps both in upsell with current clients, but also recognizing who will be your biggest champions, but also your biggest detractors when it comes to acquiring new clients, because it'll give you kind of an idea really what your what your connected audience, what your tribe thinks about you. So that net promoter score should be not only with customers, but your business partners and your employees. They will be the ones that will showcase you if they believe in the organization, its values, its products, its services, at much more effective rates, and then soften the opportunities for salespeople to start having those solution discussions early, and marketing to increase the awareness that much quicker. And I think it also will give organizations an idea of the pitfalls, of issues that they might have with their reputation, things they don't even know about that haven't become a crisis yet, but can be bellwethers to something you should deal with now. So that way your 2025 goals can be met at a much more cost-effective and profitable manner. So I appreciate that. Now that we've sort of discussed, goals, what we're going to set up for this year, metrics, what we're going to look at, let's talk about some of the tactics. So, Brent, in your position, what are some of the lead generation tactics that you think businesses could implement? And then, Katie, I want you to backfill that with the marketing side.
Yeah, I mean, for me, with salespeople, lead generation really gets down to kind of the basic blocking and tackling. Is, if you don't have a qualified lead to follow up on, you better go find one, right? So that gets back to knowing your audience, knowing who's the ideal candidate, and having a path to get to that. Now, if I define for my sales team to grow the business and find prospects, I need to figure out which of my existing customers I want more of. And so how do we go out and get more like that? And then kind of teach them where to fish. But at some point, it's going to get down to that basic, whether they call it a sales development rep or a business development rep, but it's that outbound activity of calling, emailing, connecting, finding the key strategic partners that can refer you in. But there needs to be an activity plan that's built around finding and getting in front of that ideal prospect.
Appreciate it. Katie?
Well, if we're talking really tactical, a lot of businesses we work with rely on SEO and being found on search. There's a lot of changes to SEO right now. Not only Google's core algorithm update, which they released on Friday, but AI. AI is changing search a lot, and AI results are showing up at the top of search, and they're ranking them a little bit different than normal search results. So if you're not up to date on how those changes are going to affect your SEO and your keyword marketing plan, I would do some research. There's a lot of information out there, certainly blogs on our website, or just Google it. But I would stay on top of that, because that space is changing a lot. And if you can master it and be ahead of the game on those SEO changes, I think you have a competitive advantage. because we're all going to see our positions drop a little bit over the next weeks or months as the algorithm change takes place. But if you can find out how to get into more of those AI snippets and really capitalize on the changes and the content they want to see, you'll be ahead of the game. I also think this is a really important time to think about things like retargeting and nurturing leads, because again, we have seen a little hesitation in most consumers. And so if somebody has been to your website or they've engaged with your content, but they haven't taken that step toward a conversion, this is a great time to hit them with retargeting ads or an email drip campaign if you have their email. Just that collateral that continues to educate them about your business and sort of walks them a little further down that road to being able to reach out to you. Even things like if people are clicking on stories in your email marketing newsletter, can you reach out to those people and say, hey, I saw you read this article. Can I help you with something? Can you send them more information on that topic? So not from a pushy salesy standpoint, but from a really staying in touch and educating and nurturing. I think those tactics are really important. And then if we zoom out just a little bit, I think right now, targeted messaging, really specific targeted messaging to your exact client is going to be more important than ever. People are wanting more customized experiences and more understanding that you know their pain points and you can speak directly to that. So one size fits all marketing collateral no longer works. You need to think about who are your target audience segments and what kinds of collateral do you need to create separately for each one of them. And it even filters down to things like account-based marketing, where not only are you going after, small businesses, $5 to $10 million who need your software, but you're also going after specific companies that you'd like to work with and tailoring content and outreach to those specific companies. So I think that's sort of a new area for a lot of businesses. They don't get that granular in their targeting. But I think in this crowded environment and with the sort of hesitancy we've seen, you're really going to need to show that you know your customers and it's time to get that specific.
Let's pull that string a little bit, actually, when you get there. But before I do that, Brent, you had something you wanted to add?
I did. Sorry, Dave. I think what you just touched on, I think is so crucial to the revenue generation process for both marketing and sales, is that too often, I think business owners, sales leaders hire somebody with kind of a broad net approach. Go out and find us customers. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden they wake up to a business that looks different than what they'd anticipated or hoped for, right? I think the more detailed you get as to who you want to sell to, what that ideal prospect is, you prioritize it, and then you equip them with whether it's an informed buyer persona, but the more I know about what that buyer's challenges are and how I solve those problems, the more specific I can get in my messaging that actually gets their attention. And so I think this idea that we can be generic in our approach and get some, I think you can't. Only way to rise above the noise is to be very targeted in what you say to make sure that it resonates with who you're talking to. A general sales message just isn't going to cut through.
Well, and 14 years ago, when I started the agency, that more one size fits all messaging worked better, right? That was effective. Yeah. And today it's just not anymore.
Yeah. Okay. So let me play devil's advocate for a minute for both of you, because this is where I want to pull the string from a reputation standpoint, right? From a crisis standpoint, the thing that usually ignites a dispute that then creates a post that goes viral is when organizations are inconsistent in their messaging, in their actions, in a perceived expectation that was not met. So, and how do you create targeted messaging for a specific audience and yet remain consistent in the value propositions and the values and your approach across all avenues and all audiences? Katie, why don't you start with that?
I love this question. Can I jump in? Because I happen to think that the most important part of lead generation is your brand messaging. Because it doesn't matter who you get in front of, if they don't resonate with what you're saying to them, you're not going to get that conversion. Right. And so I think a strong brand messaging strategy does talk about your overall company and what's your value proposition, who are you, your mission, your values, those sorts of things. But then you break it down and say, how are we communicating those things in each of the channels to our target audiences? And it doesn't mean you give different messages, but certain parts of your message are going to resonate more strongly with certain audience segments. And so you need to understand, who are you reaching on LinkedIn and what should you be talking about there? Who is in, you have 3 different types of emails that go out to 3 different types of customers. What do each of those say? And so tailoring it not only to the tactics, but to the type of company you're talking to. And then one of the reasons Brent and I are friends is because I think it's really important that your sales team and your marketing team collaborate on this messaging and what you're saying to certain types of audiences. Because if the sales team is out there talking about one thing to their prospects, but then the prospects go back to the website to get a little more information and it sounds totally different, or the same key points aren't being addressed, that disconnect is going to inhibit your ability to close that lead. And so I think there has to be a co-creation between both those departments. And sometimes there's a healthy tension between us, right, Brent? Where we, we want to talk about this and they want to talk about this. And you have to come to a place where everybody has that same messaging and is willing to talk about it in the same way. Because every email, every social post, every conversation, every networking spiel, every web page has to be consistent in the tone and the key points about who you are as a company, or consumers see through that immediately. That doesn't mean you say the same thing to every audience, because every audience has different needs from you, but you represent yourself and what you stand for the same way and how those needs help their specific problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Brent, how about you?
Yeah, I'm getting a jet over my head. Sorry. So I think if you roll the clock back, not even that long ago, marketing and sales were somewhat different silos, because marketing could focus on the features and benefits of a product. And it was kind of assumed that then sales would take those out and just figure out how to get customers to see that. And I think it may have worked for a while, but again, in a highly competitive market, you've got to be much more targeted about that. So I love the idea of our previous answer where we're talking about, if you get very, very detailed about who you want, who your buyer is, then I really identify what their concerns in the organization are. Because at the end of the day, all buyers are concerned with one thing that's keeping them from moving forward. And that's some risk that they have to take to endorse your product or service or choose you. So the more that you can do to uncover that in the beginning, if marketing and sales can work towards really identifying what is that buyer, what are their challenges, what problem are we solving, and then equipping the salespeople to have the right messaging at each point. So again, if you have a complex sale and you have a discovery questionnaire, let's get to the questions that really get to uncovering the problem, not to lead to a presentation. If we have a proposal, let's make sure that we really shape it around the problem we're solving, not just a bunch of data about our solution, right? Let's really get back to reminding the client consistently of what problem we're solving for them, not just what our product can do, right? So I get back to that. So what would happen then is, I think marketing has an obligation to do more on the detailed, here's the client we're going after, here's why, here's the problem we solve. And then sales has the responsibility to give feedback. Hey, here's what I heard from the customer. So there's constant refinement of messaging that goes back, because the salespeople are hearing things about the competition. They're hearing things about the customer's actual needs or actual concerns, that if that doesn't get brought back into marketing to address, to update the messaging, then the system starts to break down. So the collaboration is key between the marketing and sales in a very targeted, focused approach.
I appreciate that. A reminder to the audience, now would be a good time to start thinking about your questions and put those in the chat. We've got a couple more questions before we want to turn this over to you. So feel free to do so. We'll read those as they come in. But as that is developing, I'm going to come back to the marketing and sales collaboration in a minute, because I want to circle back to a point that we had made probably a few minutes ago specific to SEO, and that was how AI, artificial intelligence, is really changing the nature of marketing and sales for businesses. And I'd love to get your take on where it's useful and where you see it not so useful, at least for the next 15 months or so. Katie, why don't I get you to start with that?
Yeah, you say 15 months because it'll completely change in that time.
There's no reason to talk further than that, right? So
I mean, we might say 6 months, but
yeah, fair.
But yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to understand about AI is that we are at the very beginning. And as cool and as, advanced as it seems, 5 years from now, we won't even remember what it was like now, right? I mean, it is changing at light speed, maybe 5 months from now, who knows? And so I approach it cautiously. I think number one, you can't ignore it. If you think, oh, well, I'm not going to get into that, your competitors probably are. And
Yeah.
so I don't care if you like it. I don't love it, but I'm using it because you've got to be using it and you've got to at least be exploring what it can do for your business right now, because like it or not, it is the future. And it's changing a lot of our industries, right? A lot of them are leaning into AI. So what do I think it's good for? Well, the analytical capabilities of AI, the ability to analyze large amounts of data are very, very helpful, especially in marketing. If you have a lot of data from your website or your email opens or whatever, and you can put a large amount of data and say, analyze trends, tell me how to address these trends. That can be really good for creating targeted messaging and targeted sort of aiming of your collateral. So I think analyzing data is good. Sometimes we put in all the results from the channels we're watching, email, websites, digital ads, etc. And then we also add in last month's numbers and say, what are you seeing in the trends here? And while I would never take that and deliver it to a client, I would encourage my staff to look at what AI came up with by analyzing large amounts of data and say, okay, how do we use our critical thinking, our strategic brain to understand what's happening here and what to do about it? So it can make that number crunching part a lot faster.
Yeah.
And likewise, when you talk about content creation, I don't allow my staff to create something on AI and turn it into a client because I don't trust AI that much yet. We're still at the very beginning, and our clients trust us to be brand journalists, and there's a certain amount of integrity that comes with that. But what I do think it's good for is helping to brainstorm topics or get over a stuck point or even brainstorm SEO keywords you could go after, like the ideation aspect of it and help us get started. And then I am sometimes, this is a caveat, but I am sometimes a fan of taking content I have already written, like a long form blog post, and letting Gemini, which is what we use, help me break it into social media posts. So using my own writing to parse content out into shorter things, but I would never just say, make social media content about this, and then I would use that because I don't trust it that far. I only trust it when I've given it the inputs that I believe in.
I appreciate that. I got some thoughts, but Brent, how about you? What are you seeing?
I don't see artificial intelligence right now impacting sales maybe as much as it would, for example, in marketing, because you have the ability to create all these things at the push of a button. But what I do see is there is a lot of technology advances. So there's around insights, whether it's CRMs that now tell you when your clients opened emails, or if it's automated email campaigns, or if it's databases like Zoom Info that can give you predictive buyer signals that people are looking for things. And so there is good technology that's coming out to help salespeople become more aware of opportunities maybe sooner than they would have.
Yeah.
But from a simplistic standpoint, I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at like a chat GPT or one, a Copilot or one of these. When you're doing an email communication, and go ahead and run it through the filter of saying, does it make this more professional or more friendly? Because they're so good, they're so quick, they're so easy that why not take a little bit of an extra step just to get some help from the grammar, the phrasing to make you sound a little bit better. I think it's an easy tool to use. As long as we never forget that at the end of the day, people still buy from people, right? So all of these things help, but it doesn't give us the excuse to disengage and rely on technology. People still want to know that you're going to be the person there to help kind of hold their hand and cross the finish line and be there after the sale, because people still buy from people. right?
I'm absolutely agreeing with you there. It is a great tool to have as a sounding board, but I think where it gets into real issues of reputation damage is when you use it in place of generating thoughts, of thinking for you, or speaking on your behalf. The authenticity that has to come from a human being who is selling to another human being, who is engaging in a mutually beneficial relationship, still is paramount. And I thought you said it well, Brent. People buy from people. And that's, I don't care if you're selling a widget on a website to a broad consumer base, or you're a large scale business to business services company that has a finite, very niche market segment. You still have to create a bond with the buyer for long-term benefit. And the moment you allow AI to replace that is the moment that it becomes an issue. And that doesn't mean that I don't see AI being helpful on as a chatbot for customer service, for quick references for things, or can I help you? Can I navigate you to something else? But when you get it in place of actually being able to talk to somebody to walk that customer through a real complicated problem, or you require this exhaustive rigmarole to get them to talk to somebody, is where you lose customers. And I think I get concerned that there are organizations who look at the short-term cost benefit against the long-term revenue and brand reputation detriment that could occur from that one there. Anyway, that's my thought. But yes, we got a couple of questions.
Jump in one more time.
Oh,
Sorry.
please. Yeah, absolutely.
Just think, as a final thought on this, I think there's a perception out there that you can do things faster, cheaper, better with AI. And I would just caution against that. Like, AI is a tool, it makes us more efficient, but it cannot at this point replace human teams. And so when I see businesses trying to go all in on it, I feel like it's going to bite them in the end. So that's
I appreciate that. Thank you. We've got a couple of questions here, which are asking kind of, which was going to be my last question. Can you both give examples? And Brent, I'll start with you, about how sales and marketing teams really do work together well. You mentioned a couple of them at a high level in your previous comments, but I'm wondering if you can get a couple examples where you saw that working well, and you think that should be sort of the mantra for the end of this year and the beginning of next.
Well, I think it starts at the very beginning. A company can't have a revenue goal without the sales and marketing leaders in the same room, working on the same thing. It doesn't. So at the very beginning, what do I want my business to look like? Is what kind of customers do I want? How do I want it to grow? And so once that path is set, then it's looking at my sales process model and seeing what are the key activities and what assets do I have in place to support each step of the process. And then it's a constant refinement. So I would say that you don't just have sales and marketing at the beginning, but whether you do a monthly review or a quarterly review, you should have those regular meetings to say, are we on track? What's working? What's not? What data do we have, either from the funnel model all the way down to the sales process effectiveness, to say, what levers do we need to adjust or pull or refine based on our original plan, and what feedback are we getting from both groups, right? But too often I see that these departments are maybe brought in together to talk about goals, and then there's no consistency or collaboration as it goes forward, and really no ongoing review. Like, were we on the right target? Did we get the message right? Do we really understand what our buyers want? When salespeople come back from a meeting, do we actually take the time to, what was the learning from that? And how do we make sure that marketing's aware, because marketing controls that messaging, positioning, and response to that. So I think it's really having the discipline to start together and then do the walk together, right?
Yeah,
Totally get said.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's really, whenever we do a kickoff meeting with a new client, we want the sales team there to interface with our outsourced marketing team. And then every strategy, like quarterly analysis we have the sales team there. Because what's important to do marketing really well, especially in lead gen, is the constant feedback from the sales team. So I can look at numbers in a report and say, we generated 10 leads this week, but I need Brent's team to say, how many of these were viable? Were these the right customers? And if we're not constantly talking to the sales team about feedback about who they're talking to, and are we targeting the right people, or do we need to shift one way or the other? Then we can just blindly be generating numbers and not really understand if we're making the desired difference in the business. And then, like Brent mentioned, we count on the feedback. What messaging is resonating? What are you hearing from people? What caused them to have a meeting with you? And we can tweak our messaging and our collateral and even our targeting based on that feedback. So every week with our clients, if we're generating reports on leads generated, we also want a sales report based on who they talked to and how those engagements went. Did they close? Are they progressing? Was it a no-go? That data can help us dial in our activity so much more. And so I think Brent's right. There has to be a constant collaboration and a walk beside each other and constant touch points, and an understanding that it's not on one side or the other to make this happen. We are really a team, and it shouldn't be adversarial. It should be collaborative and nurturing of each other, because when we get the right people and we close the deals, everybody wins. It makes marketing look good, it makes sales look good, and most importantly, the business grows, which is what both sides want.
Appreciate that. We got a question from Mark Woodward. I want to read it so both of you get that. And then actually, I'm going to, Katie, I'll let you field this first with Brent. How do you balance an appropriate amount of what you call sort of education, nurturing of a market through retargeting and drip email versus too much? What's sort of the saturation point where you're just becoming spam and annoying for that one there? And this is a question coming from, an e-commerce business owner.
Okay, great. Because that's a hard question to answer depending on your industry. Listen, with our e-commerce clients, more email is better typically. Like typically we're sending emails once a week, maybe twice a week. But the way you gauge that is through the engagement of your audience. How many opens are you getting? How many clicks on the content are you getting? How much traffic is it driving back to your website? How many unsubscribes are you getting? And there's no one size fits all answer. You have to watch all of these touch points and sort of make a determination. You're going to get some unsubscribes if you send too often. Well, what level of unsubscribe are we comfortable with? I wouldn't throw out your program if you got 2 unsubscribes one week, but if you're starting to see that number creep up and it's getting larger, then yeah, maybe we need to rethink our cadence. Likewise, if you're sending a bunch of emails and nobody's opening them, then you don't have a very engaged audience, and you need to maybe rethink the content you're sending out via email. And who are you sending to? Are these people that know about you but haven't purchased? Are they people that have purchased in the past that you want to repeat purchase? There may be different cadences appropriate for both those audiences. So the more you can segment those lists and really, we talked about very specific messaging, segment your list and tell them exactly what it matters to them. For one of our e-commerce clients, they sell a bunch of different things, and we segment the list based on items they have purchased in the past. So people that have bought product A get a different email than people who have bought product B. And sometimes we try to cross-sell those, and sometimes we just sell the bigger level of those products. But the messaging is very specific, and the cadence is very specific based on how engaged they are.
Now, it's know the situation, right? We talked about this at the beginning, about understand your reputation, but in this case, understand what's working, what's not. Look at your data, get measurable data, so you can see what your audience are telling you, whether it's too much or not. I appreciate that. Brent, how about you?
Yeah, it's a little different on the sales, because typically a lot of that we're kind of at the point of engagement. So a lot of that marketing activity has been done to get their attention. Now the question is, but it's a lesson I learned a long time ago in sales. If you have a sale that's kind of complex, that buyers take their time in evaluating, it's not a quick decision type of sale. I often find that salespeople are very challenged with the idea of doing regular calls. They feel like they're becoming a nuisance or a bother. And I learned a long time ago that you generally win more by staying in touch more than you do going silent. And I think if we go back to the very first thing where we talked about trust, one of the elements that builds trust is time. And the more consistently that you engage with a prospect, even knowing they're not ready to make a purchase, There's nothing wrong with that high touch call that just says, just checking in, want to make sure everything's okay. Are we still on track? Any new things come up? Any new information that I need to be aware of? Just a high touch call to make sure you got everything you need, right? That over time sends a message that I'm engaged, I care, I'm staying the course, versus, once we pull back and hope that they call us, it's not nearly as effective. So encouraging sales reps just to stay connected, even when there's not the probability of making an immediate sale, will increase your closing ratio a lot, because you stayed with that client on the journey while they're making their decision.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. This has been great. And in the time we have left, I want to ask one final question of the two of you before we call it a day. We've talked a lot about setting yourself up with goals, putting together your infrastructure now, understanding what you need to measure, metrics, and we discussed overarching tactics, marketing and sales coordination, the implementation of AI, and how all that will make for a great 2025. But if you had to distill it down right now, as we've overwhelmed everybody with this wonderful bit of information, give our audience one thing that they should do literally today to get themselves geared up for the rest of the year, and more importantly, 2025, either in marketing or sales. Katie, if you had one thing to do, what would that be?
Well, I'm going to tell you, one of the biggest mistakes I see business owners make is that they're doing a lot of activity, right? They're doing a lot of marketing activity. Sometimes they're even doing all the right activity, but they're doing it without an overarching comprehensive plan about how it all works together. And marketing sort of in a vacuum, here and then here and then here, it doesn't tend to work. You need to bring it all together and understand how each touch point feeds into the next one. Mm-hmm. My advice would be, ask yourself the hard questions. Do we really have a strategy, or are we just doing stuff? And if you don't have a strategy, that would be a really great initiative for Q4 or even Q1. Get a roadmap in place and understand what's working and what isn't and how it works together. And you may find that some of the things you're doing are not productive uses of your resources, whether it's time or money. And then you may be missing other opportunities. But I would do it initially, and then every 6 months, I would revisit that strategy and audit it and say, are these still the right things? And what have we learned? I never am an advocate of making a strategy that lasts longer than 6 months, because things are going to change in your market, things are going to change with your audience, and you're going to get a lot of data, which you can help make decisions with in that time. And so put a formal plan in place, execute to the plan, and check it frequently. Don't just try the activities.
Appreciate that. Brent, how about you?
Well, I don't think I could have said it any better. I think this is a good time of year too. As the thing about the end of the year is it's a time of reflection of the past year and what are we going to do differently. And I love the idea of not just looking at activities. I think, I've been in sales long enough to sell when the pre-CRM, pre-internet, where the only tool a sales leader had was more activity. And that's it. It's about being strategic. It's really about knowing what your metrics are, knowing what you're looking for in advance so that you can make changes quickly, right? So I think that using this opportunity to reflect and really challenge yourself to say, what am I missing? What don't I have? Where were the gaps in my insight and information that if I had this, I would be more effective? And then really go figure out a way to get that. Because at the end of the day, you got to get off the treadmill long enough to figure out what's working, make sure you even head in the right direction. So I would totally affirm what Katie just said about using this time to get that plan and make sure that plan is one that you can execute going forward.
I appreciate that. I'll add one thing to the mix, and because I see a lot of organizations that don't do this. You don't want to be the last person to know that somebody is chatting about you, positive or negative. And there's a free tool to use that. It's Google Alerts, alerts.google.com. put in quotations your organization's name and your key executive's name, those who are in the forefront of champion and also at times defending your brand. If there is somebody who's talking great about you, whether it's in an online review, a social media post, a blog, a news report, you'll get alerts. And if you set it up right, within a couple of hours of it being posted and indexed by Google, so you'll at least be cognizant of what the trends are. People are talking about you. And if somebody's taking a pot shot at you, whether it's deserved or not, you will at least be aware of it so you can take action before it becomes a full-blown crisis. I see so many organizations don't do that. In this day and age where it's about trust, still about people buying from people, that's essential for any organization, whether you're a local mom and pop shop to a big Fortune 100 company. Katie and Brent, this has been an absolute treat. Thank you for so much for your time. And Stephen, thanks for putting this all together and herding us cats as we put this webinar on there. It's been a real treat. Thanks for everybody for their attendance.
Nice job.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Katie. And to all the attendees, thanks so much for joining us.